Committee will come to order. Before we turn to the committee business, I want to take a minute to point out the beautiful Christmas tree that was delivered to our committee room this week in the back there, and I appreciate those who are responsible. To the National Park Foundation for securing a generous donor, Larry Smith, who drove the tree up from his Christmas tree farm in Newland, North Carolina this week. So thank you very much, Mr. Smith. I appreciate it. It will make for a cheery backdrop to our work today, which is both business meeting for 3 nominations and legislative hearing. The 3 nominations are David Crane to be Undersecretary of Energy for Infrastructure, Jeffrey Marushin did I get that right? I know.
He's not here today. It's okay.
Senator, just help me with this one, if you will. Marutian? Marutian. Assistant Secretary of Energy for Energy Efficient. He and I became on a first-name basis. I just went to Jeffrey. And then we have Gene Rodriguez to be Assistant Secretary of Energy for Electricity Delivery and Energy Reliability. We're going to turn to that as soon as we get a quorum. But today we also have 3 witnesses before us to provide expert testimony on 15 bills, 1 resolution, and a discussion draft of the Nuclear Waste Administration Act. There have been huge strides made in the 117th Congress to support both continued operation and the expanded deployment of nuclear energy. But what to do with our nuclear waste is a nut that we have yet to crack, and it falls to this committee to address the back end of the fuel cycle. We're responsible for finding an equitable consent-based solution to storing and disposing of our nuclear waste. What's clear to me after 35 years of stalemate is that a new approach is needed. The Nuclear Waste Administration Act forms an entity that is properly funded and has the mission of working with communities and states to site, construct, and operate nuclear waste facilities. It opens up possibilities for us to move forward and find an environmentally and socially responsible solution to deal with our nuclear waste. This is a solvable problem, and I hope my colleagues will join me in working on it as we move forward, and I look forward to Dr. Huff's testimony on the draft, on this draft. Secondly, I would like to highlight Senator Casey's and Senator Braun's STREAM Act, which would ensure that abandoned mine land grants from the bipartisan infrastructure law can be utilized in the same way as grants allocated from the traditional AML trust fund to address acid mine drainage. For generations, West Virginians and coal communities around the country have done the heavy lifting that made us the world leader that we are today. These communities still bear the scars of those sacrifices. I'm proud to co-sponsor this bill because it will be a huge help in repairing the nearly 1,500 miles of AML impaired streams in my state of West Virginia alone. With the advancements that WVU has made in our ability to extract rare earth elements from acid mine drainage, cleaning up watersheds impacted by pollution from abandoned mines will not only make our communities safer, it's going to also provide a unique opportunity to onshore our supply chain for critical minerals. It is truly a win-win situation. Another way that we can strengthen our domestic supply chain is by ensuring that we have skilled workforce in the mining field for years to come. That is why I'm also pleased that we'll be discussing a bill that I've been very much concerned about with Ranking Member Barrasso, the Mining School Act, today. By providing targeted support for the mining and geological programs at our colleges and universities, this important bill will help ensure that the next generation is prepared to design and operate all of the new mines that are needed to meet the supply chain challenge that we have. We also have a handful of public land bills on today's agenda. The committee has processed several dozen public land and water bills this Congress, and I remain hopeful that working with Senator Barrasso, we will be able to reach bipartisan agreement on a lands package. While our subcommittees typically hold hearings on lands and water bills, given the late date that we have included these bills on the agenda today so that we can get the administration's input and potentially have these bills available if we are able to reach an agreement on the package. With that, I'm going to turn to Senator Barrasso for his opening remarks.
Well, thanks so much, Mr. Chairman. If confirmed, Mr. Crane would oversee more than $70 billion in appropriations. He would have authority to loan another $250 billion. It's an extraordinary amount of the American people's money. In the wrong hands, it could create an enormous liability for American taxpayers. Mr. Crane is a former CEO who got fired for his poor investment strategy. He's an activist who's called for bullying other companies that do not subscribe to his self-described green dream. That dream is an ideology that would kill traditional energies such as natural gas and coal without a reliable, affordable, and secure He's in lockstep with hands down all of Mr. Rodriguez. Last 8 years, he's president of Environment and Infrastructure of ICF, a consultant. For that, he served as manager and director in California Edison, largest utilities, the American Council on Energy Efficient Economy, and the California Efficiency Demand and Management Council. He understands that baseload sources of energy, such as natural gas, play a critical role in providing consumers with secure, reliable, affordable energy. Mr. Rodriguez is well qualified to lead the Office of Electricity, and I will support his nomination. I commend Mr. Manchin for his public service. Unlike Mr. Rodriguez, Mr. Maruchian's background and experience have little to do with the organization for which he has been nominated to lead. His skills and expertise may be appropriate for the Department of Transportation, but they don't qualify him for office at the Department of Energy. I therefore can't support his nomination. I'll now turn, Mr. Chairman, to the hearing statement as we look forward to hearing from a number of special people today who will testify. And I'm going to limit my remarks to the 5 bills that I've introduced or co-sponsored with you and with other members of this committee. The first is S. 3152. This bill would prohibit entities that have defaulted on a Department of Energy loan or loan guarantee in the past from receiving a new loan or new loan guarantee. This summer, congressional Democrats increased the department's lending authority from $40 billion to $290 billion. They also provided more than $11 billion to cover the cost of serving those loans. Now, a cost that applicants typically have paid in the past. That means the department has a greater chance of wasting taxpayer dollars on projects that do not deserve support. We all remember Solyndra and the many other bad loans that the Obama administration made. Basic good governance to ensure that an entity that has failed to repay a federal loan in the past is not rewarded with another taxpayer-backed loan. The next bill is one that you mentioned, Mr. Chairman, the S. 3915, the Mining Schools Act of 2022, which both of us have so far introduced and co-sponsored. This bill would establish a grant program to help mining schools recruit students. According to the American Exploration and Mining Association, a large portion of the workforce in the U.S. mining industry is nearing retirement age, heightening the need for qualified, well-educated college graduates to enter the workplace soon. I believe our legislation, Mr. Chairman, will help address that need. The next is S. 3978, the No Russia Act of 2022. This summer, we considered my bills to eliminate imports of Russian uranium and accelerate the domestic availability of high-assay, low-enriched uranium for advanced reactors. Today, we're considering my bill to ensure a domestic supply of low-enriched uranium for existing reactors. Together, these 3 bills provide the comprehensive solution needed to eliminate our reliance on Russian uranium. Since these bills have been introduced, I've worked closely with you, Mr. Chairman, as well as Senator Risch to develop a comprehensive solution to these issues. Congress needs to act to ensure this solution is enacted into law by the end of the year. We need to stop funding Putin's war machine immediately and need to restore our domestic supply chain for nuclear fuel. Also introduced S. 4651, a bill to prohibit the department from selling crude oil from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve to rogue states. Earlier this summer, the department sold our emergency oil reserves to Unipec. Now, that is a subsidiary of China's state-owned oil company, Sinopec.
Okay.
My bill would eliminate sales to countries like China that violate religious freedom. It would also bar the sale to entities that purchase oil from sanctioned nations such as Russia and Iran. The last bill, Mr. Chairman, that I plan to discuss is S. 4579, the Colorado River Basin Conservation Act. This bill would provide incentives to farmers and ranchers to use techniques that conserve water to help address the declining levels of Lake Mead and Lake Powell. In June, Camille Touton, the Commissioner of the Bureau of Reclamation, called for additional action from the basin states to generate 2 to 4 million acre feet per year of additional water in the Colorado River system. In response, the upper basin states developed a 5-point plan. In July, Senator Hickenlooper and I introduced legislation reauthorizing the System Conservation Pilot Program, a key plank of that plan. The committee already passed that bill as an amendment. We are considering it today as a standalone measure. Reauthorizing this program is an important step that we can take to help answer the Bureau's call for these historic water reductions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Before we go to our witnesses and as we accumulate our quorum, I have a few of our senators who want to speak to their bill. I'll start with Senator Wyden, and we'll go to Senator Heinrich next.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I'll be brief. Mr. Chairman, I thank you for giving us a chance to discuss a groundbreaking piece of legislation, the Oahe Act, which will put us in a position to protect some of America's most special places, their environmental treasures, their agricultural way of life, and new economic opportunities for a region hungry for them. The Malheur CEO Act has multiple benefits across Malheur County in eastern Oregon, and this legislation was developed in years of negotiation that I personally led. It was all about building trust and understanding with our local ranchers, our small businesses, our tribes, environmental groups, and hunters and all of those who make their living in the backcountry. And reflecting the importance of this bill, I'm very pleased that Diane Tiemann, chairwoman of the Burns Paiute tribe, with whom we have been working to restore indigenous lands in this bill, is here. And I just wanted to close my opening remarks by recognizing her. And I thank you again, Mr. Chairman. It's supposed to be the post-election time, and things were thought to be a little quieter, but the Finance Committee's got a couple things that we're talking to colleagues about. Thank you.
If senators who are going to speak on their bills could give us just the time to do our business right now, since we have the quorum, I'd like to move to that. Now the reporting quorum is present, we can vote on the 3 nominations. Roll call votes have been requested for Mr. Crane, Mr. Marutian, but I believe we can report Mr. Rodriguez by voice vote. I'd like to note that I appreciated Mr. Crane's written response for the record, saying that he no longer agreed with his past statement. I guess we're all entitled to make mistakes and correct that. That coal had missed the boat to decarbonize, and he knows better than that, and we have to do that. So does anyone wish to be heard on any of these nominations before we vote? If not, we will start with Mr. Crane.
Mr. Manchin.
Aye.
Mr. Wyden.
Aye.
Ms. Cantwell.
Aye.
Mr. Sanders. Mr. Heinrich. Ms. Hirono. Mr. King. Ms. Cortez Masto.
She's aye by proxy.
Mr. Kelly. Mr. Hickenlooper. Mr. Barrasso.
No.
Mr. Risch.
No by proxy.
Mr. Lee.
No by proxy.
Mr. Daines. Ms. Murkowski. Mr. Hoven. Mr. Langford.
No by proxy.
Mr. Cassidy. Mrs. Hyde-Smith.
No by proxy.
Mr. Marshall.
No by proxy.
On this vote, the ayes are 13 and the noes are 7.
Nominations orderly is favorably reported, and we will move on to our next. We have Mr. Marutian. Questions now reporting that nomination of Jeffrey Marutian to be Assistant Secretary of Energy for Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy, with a recommendation that the nomination be confirmed. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Manchin.
Aye.
Mr. Wyden.
Aye.
Ms. Cantwell. Mr. Sanders. Mr. Heinrich. Ms. Hirono. Mr. King. Ms. Cortez Masto.
I have a proxy.
Mr. Kelly. Mr. Hickenlooper. Mr. Barrasso.
No.
Mr. Risch.
No by proxy.
Mr. Lee.
No by proxy.
Mr. Daines. Ms. Murkowski. Mr. Hoban. Mr. Langford.
No by proxy.
Mr. Cassidy. Mrs. Hyde-Smith.
No by proxy.
Mr. Marshall.
No by proxy.
On this vote, the ayes are 11 and the noes are 9.
Nomination in order favorably reported. The question is now on reporting the nomination of Gene Rodriguez to be Assistant Secretary of Energy for Electricity Delivery and Energy Reliability, with a recommendation that the nominations be confirmed. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Ayes have it. That concludes the business of the meeting. We will now resume to the hearing, and we will turn to Senator Heinrich.
Thank you, Chairman. Chairman Manchin, Ranking Member Barrasso, I want to thank you both for holding this hearing and for including S4995, the Continental Divide Trail Completion Act. I introduced this legislation with Senator Daines to improve the safety, accessibility, and quality of this trail that connects Americans to incredible landscapes and ecosystems across 5 states. Public lands and trails serve a vital role in conserving natural resources and providing space for diverse communities to experience the outdoors. The Continental Divide National Scenic Trail spans 3,100 miles from the deserts of New Mexico to the peaks of the Northern Rockies, passing through some of the nation's most scenic terrain and most treasured natural, historical, and cultural sites. It provides vital opportunities for both recreation and economic development to 20 official CDT gateway communities and to numerous others located along its expansive route. Today, the gaps in the trail add up to over 160 miles currently, requiring hikers to reroute onto roadways and highways. Another 600 miles of the trail route inadequately fulfill the designated purposes of the trail because of their distance from the Continental Divide, their scenic quality, or their topography. These gaps and needed relocation significantly impact trail safety and enjoyment for visitors, detracting from the trail's purpose of recreation and conservation along the Continental Divide. S4995 would create a joint Forest Service and Bureau of Land Management trail completion team to facilitate the completion of the Continental Divide Trail by its 50th anniversary in 2028. The bill directs the federal completion team to collaborate closely with states, with local governments, with landowners, with Native American communities, and others who live, work, and recreate along this trail. And in passing this legislation, we can ensure that the natural, cultural, and economic value of this incomparable trail will be conserved for generations to come. Thank you to the committee for your consideration of my legislation, and I yield back the remainder of my time.
Thank you, Senator. Now we'll turn to Senator Cantwell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for holding this important hearing on Senate Bill 4420, the CRESS Act, which Senator Collins and I introduced last June, and I also like to thank committee members Senator Cassidy and King for also agreeing to co-sponsor this legislation. According to a new report from the world's top scientists, removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere is essential to blunting the impacts of climate change. In other words, just reducing future emissions is no longer enough. So we need to figure out how to remove and trap carbon pollution from the atmosphere in order to avoid more frequent and intense extreme weather we are seeing across the United States. An example from the Pacific Northwest, my colleague just left from Oregon, but I'm sure he'll never forget his hometown of Portland hitting 114 degrees, shattering century-old records and corresponding with wildfires that rage across the Northwest. A new study found that in 2021, heat wasn't just some black swan event. It would be virtually impossible in the 1950s. But today, because of multiple trends driven by climate change, such as heat waves like these will occur once every 200 years. But if we allow global warming to reach 2 degrees Celsius, and we are on track to exceed that level, the Pacific Northwest will suffer from devastating heat waves. That is why it's so important to advance promising tools of carbon removal. Most of us on the committee know and have supported this in the past, the first comprehensive federal carbon removal R&D program in the Energy Bill of 2020, and $3.6 billion directed at the direct air capture in the bipartisan infrastructure bill, and again, the game-changing expansion of 45Q tax credit in the Inflation Reduction Act. What the CREST Act brings to the table is a focus on promising the leveraging of natural carbon removal processes, solutions such as reforestation, algae cultivation, advanced geological mineralization, and direct ocean capture. The bill also provides support for entities that are figuring out how to quantify emission reductions from capturing carbon. And the CREST Act creates a 5-year pilot carbon removal purchase program in order to spur and support private sector efforts in this area as well. So I'll look forward to asking Dr. Huff about this, but thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to my colleagues on the committee who are also Senators Cassidy and King, who are co-sponsors of this legislation.
Thank you, Senator. And now we have the presence of our dear friend, Senator Michael Bennett, who would like to make a statement on his piece of legislation.
Chairman Manchin, thank you so much for having me back to the committee, and Ranking Member Barrasso, thank you, and to the members of the committee. I really appreciate the chance to speak about my bill with Senator Hickenlooper. He had to go chair a subcommittee, so he said I'm carrying the weight for both of us. I'm happy to do that. On the Dolores River National Conservation Area and Special Management Area Act, I want to spend a minute on why this bill matters to Colorado and why it deserves this committee's bipartisan support. The Dolores River is vital to southwest Colorado. The canyon carved by the Dolores is renowned not just in our state but across the country for its majestic red rock walls that tower over the Ponderosa Pines. I hope all of you have the chance to visit one day. The Dolores River is not only a critical source of water for southwest Colorado, it is central to the region's farming, ranching, outdoor recreation, and way of life. But as with any river, over the years, different groups have had different priorities for its long-term management. While some wanted stronger federal action to protect the river and its native fish, others worry these steps would go too far and restrict local water uses. In another place, these disagreements often result in perpetual conflict and stalemate. But in Colorado, all sides came together to find a middle ground to secure the future of the Dolores River. They understood that continued uncertainty over the river's long-term management was unacceptable, so they spent nearly 2 decades debating how best to manage the river for the next generation over literally hundreds of meetings. And the result is a thoughtful, compromise bill written on the ground in Colorado by Coloradans. It enjoys the support of Republican and Democratic officials in 3 counties in southwest Colorado, Dolores, Montezuma, and San Miguel counties, along with the Ute Mountain Ute Tribe, local agricultural and ranching interests, and conservation groups. The bill would protect over 68,000 acres of public lands in Colorado and designate a national conservation area and a special management area for a portion of the Dolores River that runs through the 3 counties. The bill includes a range of designations that reflect the range of interests in the Dolores River to conserve native fish, honor water rights, and protect existing uses for farmers, ranchers, communities, and outdoor recreation. This bill represents a balanced, sensible way forward to resolve many of the longstanding disagreements, protect the river for all parties, and provide long-term certainty for generations. It's why the bill enjoys bipartisan support not only in Colorado, but in Congress. Earlier this year, every Republican in the Colorado delegation introduced an identical version of this bill, and this morning I've come with letters and testimony from counties, tribal leaders, conservation groups, sportsmen, water districts, and community leaders across southwest Colorado, all supporting this bill. Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent that these letters be entered into the hearing record.
Without objection.
Let me just end by saying how grateful I am to this committee for considering this bill, Mr. Chairman, and honoring Colorado's decades of hard work. I hope that once you've had the opportunity to look at it more closely, it will earn a strong bipartisan vote in the committee. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. And we have one question from a fellow Westerner, Senator Heinrich.
Senator, I wanted to ask you what the best way to navigate Snaggletooth Rapid is, Dolores.
You can come anytime. We'll do it together. That'll be fun.
I look forward to it.
Thank you, Senator. We appreciate it very much. And now we're going to turn to our witnesses for today's hearing, and we have the Honorable Dr. Catherine Huff, Assistant Secretary for Nuclear Energy at the Department of Energy. We have Ms. Nada Culver, which is the Deputy Director of Policy and Programs at the Bureau of Land Management within the Department of Interior. And we have Mr. Doug McIntyre, Deputy Director for the Office of Petroleum Reserves at the U.S. Department of Energy. We thank all of you for being here. Dr. Huff, we will start with yours.
Thank you, Chairman Manchin, Ranking Member Barrasso, and distinguished members of the committee. It's an honor to appear before you representing the Department of Energy along with my colleagues to discuss the various energy bills under your consideration. To meet our ambitious carbon reduction goals and rebuild U.S. leadership globally, the Biden-Harris administration is prioritizing activities that keep the existing nuclear fleet operating, deploy advanced reactor technologies, secure and sustain the nuclear fuel supply, and expand international nuclear energy cooperation. New nuclear reactor deployments also have the potential to decarbonize many industrial sectors in the United States and abroad. Ensuring this future for our nation and our allies must include a secure source of fuel for today's nuclear power plants and those of tomorrow. To support the existing fleet of nuclear reactors, DOE recently announced initial certification decisions for the Civilian Nuclear Credit Program, authorized and funded by the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. We are also working hard to publish guidance outlining certification criteria for the second round of the program. The Russian Federation's invasion of Ukraine has demonstrated the grave threat to global energy security posed by dependence on Russian-supplied fuels. Russia, the largest global enricher of uranium, currently supplies a significant fraction of the nuclear fuel used by the United States and our allies and partners. In particular, conversion and enrichment services from trusted sources are not sufficient to replace current imports from Russia, and without expansion of domestic fuel cycle capacity, the United States cannot securely support the low-enriched uranium needs of today's reactor fleet or make high-assay low-enriched uranium available for advanced reactors, research reactors, and medical isotope production. With regard to the No Russia Act of 2022, America's dependence on Russian uranium threatens our energy security. Energy security is national security, and untrustworthy state-sponsored programs have no place in our energy policy. However, any ban on uranium imports from the Russian Federation should be accompanied by strategic investments that strengthen our domestic nuclear fuel supply chain. S3978 recognizes the need to eliminate reliance on Russia and establish secure domestic sources of nuclear fuel materials, proposing a national strategic uranium reserve. The reserve would contain uranium produced and converted in the United States to be used in the event of a supply disruption. Further, the legislation seeks to allow for the expansion and refilling of the American assured fuel supply, which will be helpful to mitigate any future supply disruptions. With regard to the Nuclear Waste Administration Act and looking forward, the promise of new advanced reactors can most responsibly be realized in conjunction with progress on the management of their spent nuclear fuel. The draft bill, Nuclear Waste Administration Act, NWAA, aims to support the future of U.S. nuclear energy by addressing the back end of the fuel cycle, which is an ongoing concern that the Department is working on to address in partnership with Congress. The bill recognizes that a consent-based siting process should be used for developing interim storage and disposal options, and in September of this year, DOE issued a $16 million funding opportunity announcement to provide resources for communities and other stakeholders interested in learning more about consent-based siting and the management of spent nuclear fuel, as well as interim storage facility siting considerations. And we expect to make those awards in 2023. DOE looks forward to working with Congress to develop the draft Nuclear Waste Administration Act. With regard to other bills, on behalf of my colleagues across the department, I would also like to briefly touch on other legislation considered today. With regard to the Mining Schools Act of 2022, it would authorize the Secretary of Energy to establish a program to strengthen domestic mining education, to recruit and educate the next generation of mining engineers and other qualified professionals to meet the future energy and mineral needs of the United States. DOE looks forward to working with the committee on this legislation. S420, the CREST Act, supports the advancement of carbon dioxide removal research and development, which has a critical role in helping the United States achieve net zero emissions by 2050. Many of the activities authorized in the CREST Act align with DOE's existing work on the carbon negative shot, and DOE looks forward to working with Congress on the continued development and deployment of CDR technologies. Regarding DOE's Loan Program Office, S3152 would prohibit DOE from making a loan guarantee if the borrower has previously defaulted on an obligation guaranteed under the Title 17 Loan Guarantee Program, or if the borrower has previously defaulted on an obligation under the Advanced Technology Vehicles Manufacturing Loan Program. We're committed to working with Congress to ensure transparency in the LPO project portfolio, its due diligence and risk management processes, and oversight of the programs. S3112, the Hydrogen Technologies for Heavy Industry Grant Program, would authorize the department to provide grants at the commercial scale demonstration projects that demonstrate industrial end-use applications of hydrogen. H2 at Scales initiative, by demonstrating hydrogen's versatility to decarbonize heavy industry at a commercial scale, would be supported by this. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before the committee today. I'm happy to take your questions.
Thank you, Doctor. Now we have Ms. Culver, Deputy Director of Policy and Programs.
Chairman Manchin, Ranking Member Barrasso, and members of the committee, good morning. Thanks for having me. As mentioned, I'm Nada Wolf-Culver, the Bureau of Land Management's Principal Deputy Director. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss the bills of interest to the BLM on today's agenda. Several of these measures include provisions which align with important administration priorities, and we look forward to continuing to work with the sponsors and the committee on them. The BLM manages approximately 240 million acres of surface land located primarily in 12 western states, as well as 30% of the nation's onshore mineral resources across 700 million subsurface acres under the Federal Land Policy and Management Act, or FLPMA. FLPMA sets forth the BLM's diverse mission of multiple use and sustained yield. The BLM's mission advances the President's priorities of protecting and sustaining public lands and the wildlife, natural resources, and ecosystems they encompass for current and future generations, while also emphasizing the importance of these lands to the nation's economy and the lives and livelihoods of millions of people across the country. Respecting the ties that communities have to public lands and welcoming and valuing diverse views is vital to managing resilient, working public lands. The bills on the agenda today exemplify this commitment. I'll briefly touch on the 4 bills affecting the BLM, as well as those for which the department has submitted statements for the record. S4424, the Recreation and Public Purposes Tribal Parity Act, would amend the Recreation and Public Purposes Act to add Indian tribes to the list of entities, along with state and local governments and nonprofits, to which land can be sold or leased for recreational or other public purposes. The department supports amending the act to add tribal eligibility. It is long overdue and brings parity to tribes under this act. S4542, the Dolores River National Conservation Area and Special Management Area Act, establishes the Dolores River NCA on approximately 45,000 acres of BLM-managed public lands in southwestern Colorado. S4542 continues Colorado's long tradition of locally driven conservation efforts guided by the people who live and recreate in western Colorado to protect these special places for future generations. The BLM supports the bill as it aligns with the administration's conservation goals, and we look forward to working with the sponsor on some technical modifications. S4860, the Malheur Community Empowerment for the Oahe Act, would designate approximately 1.1 million acres of wilderness while providing for increased grazing flexibility on certain public lands in Malheur County, Oregon. It would also release approximately 200,000 acres of wilderness study areas and transfer about 32,000 acres to be held in trust for the Burns Paiute tribe. The BLM supports S4860 as it aligns with the administration's conservation goals through its wilderness designations, as well as its approach to improving the ecological health of working lands and restoring tribal homelands to tribal ownership. We look forward to continuing to work with the sponsor on this measure. S4995, the Continental Divide Trail Completion Act, directs the Secretaries of Agriculture and Interior to complete the 3,100-mile Continental Divide National Scenic Trail by November 10, 2028, the 50th anniversary of the trail's designation. The department supports S4995 as it aligns with our priorities to provide safe and equitable access to outdoor recreation opportunities for all Americans. Additionally, the Office of Surface Mining, Reclamation, and Enforcement has submitted a statement for the record on S3957, the Safeguarding Treatment for the Restoration of Ecosystems from Abandoned Mines Act, which would authorize states and tribes receiving bipartisan infrastructure law grants to deposit up to 30% of their annual grant funding into a state or tribal fund to address acid mine drainage. The department appreciates the opportunity this would provide to states and tribes for the mitigation of legacy water pollution now and in the future. Finally, the Bureau of Reclamation has provided a statement for the record in support of S4579, the Colorado River Basin Conservation Act. And the National Park Service has provided statements for the record in support of S4732, the Enslaved Voyages Memorial Act, and in support of Senate Joint Resolution 62, approving the location of a memorial honoring journalists who sacrificed their lives in service. The department again looks forward to continuing to work with the committee and Congress on the important public land issues addressed in these bills. Thank you again for the opportunity to be here today, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much. And now we have Mr. Doug McIntyre. Doug.
Thank you, Chairman Manchin, Ranking Member Barrasso, and distinguished members of the committee. It is an honor to appear before you and represent the Department of Energy at this hearing. This morning, I will speak to the proposed legislation under my purview as the Deputy Director of DOE's Office of Petroleum Reserves, commonly referred to as OPR. The energy sector provides critical resources, electricity and fuel, that we all depend on. OPR's role and efforts are instrumental in addressing the continuously evolving risks facing the energy sector today. The mission of the Office of Petroleum Reserves is to protect the United States from severe petroleum supply interruptions through the acquisition, storage, distribution, and management of emergency petroleum stocks, and to carry out the U.S. obligations under the International Energy Program. The OPR manages the operational readiness of 3 emergency stockpiles: the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, often called the SPR, the United States Crude Oil Stockpile, also the Northeast Home Heating Oil Reserve, often referred to as NEHOR, and the Northeast Gasoline Supply Reserve, often referred to as the NGSR. In the event of a natural disaster or other national emergency, the U.S. can rely on these emergency stockpiles to maintain a constant supply of crude oil and other petroleum products. In this way, OPR directly supports the Department of Energy's goal of energy dominance by ensuring energy security for America. Collective preparedness and collective response are at the heart of our work, which is why the Department strengthened the Office of Cybersecurity, Energy Security, and Emergency Response, or CSER, role with the addition of the OPR this summer. The transition of OPR to CSER consolidates and streamlines the Department's critical emergency response function and improves the Department's ability to utilize the Office of Petroleum Reserves as a critical resource during natural disasters and other emergency events. I'll now turn to the 2 bills under consideration today that relate to the SPR. Senate Bill 4651, the Prohibiting Strategic Petroleum Reserve Sales to Rogue States Act, would limit the sale and export of petroleum products from the SPR to countries that are designated as countries of concern for religious freedom under the International Religious Freedom Act of 1998. The legislation would limit the sale of SPR crude oil to state-owned entities subject to a ban or imposition of sanctions. These companies would be required to certify they have not purchased oil from countries subject to U.S. sanctions or bans while they were in effect. If the Department of Energy determines these companies have purchased oil from these countries of concern, they would not be able to bid on SPR oil at auction. The second piece of legislation, Senate Bill 4515, the No Emergency Crude Oil for Foreign Adversaries Act, would require the Secretary of Energy to stipulate, as a condition on the sale of SPR crude oil at auction, that the oil cannot be exported to China, Russia, North Korea, or Iran. The proposed legislation also requires a report on the route to destination and place of refinement of SPR crude oil and the ownership of the refinement facilities of all crude oil sold at auction from the SPR since November 23, 2021. The SPR currently has no way to track the movement of the crude oil sold after delivery. Custody transfer of crude oil from the SPR takes place at either a pipeline boundary of the SPR site, commercial crude oil storage facility, or at the vessel which the crude oil is loaded. Once the vessel is loaded, the crude oil on that vessel may be sold multiple times prior to reaching the intended destination. In closing, thank you for the opportunity to testify today. OPR is and remains committed to protecting our nation's energy security and resilience. I look forward to your questions.
And thank you. Now we'll start the questions, and I'll begin, and it stays with you, Mr. McIntyre. We don't have a bill before us on the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, and I'd like to better understand the plans to refill. First of all, you might give us a little bit of a background on when we started the SPR. I think it was after the '74 oil embargo. A few of us are old enough to remember that. But anyway, and how we determined and how we got to 700, almost 800 million barrels. Why did we think we needed 800? Where is the mark now? I think we're down around 400 now, or in that neighborhood. And where do you think we need to go? So if you give us a little bit, it might help the committee understand what we're trying to achieve. And I'm understanding also in the cavities that we use for this, you can't be taking oil out and putting it in at the same time. That's correct? Okay.
Yes, sir.
And also, if you can tell me if any of our cavities, we've had one collapse, as I'm understanding. We've lost one, correct?
No, sir.
We haven't? I thought we had. We had for what reason? Yeah, we know we had damage to one, and we thought that was because of how we were managing it, but I could be wrong. Anyway, explain that, the shape that we're in. What is our total capacity to store oil, and where do you think we need to be? And give us a little bit of background, if you will.
Thank you, Senator, for the question. I wasn't old enough to be buying gasoline during the Arab oil embargo, but I was old enough to be in my dad's car while he was waiting in line.
While he was raising Cain and cussing, I remember those days.
So, yes, sir. So, as you said, the SPR was created as part of the Energy Production, EPCA, Energy Conservation Act, and was created in 1977, 78, as a result of the Arab oil embargo. It took several years for us to build up the reserves.
What did you have a target? What was it? How did you set a target of where you had to get, how much we had to have in the United States?
So initially, the target was set at 500 million barrels.
Gotcha.
It was then increased to 1 billion barrels. We eventually got to 715 million barrels of capacity. We reached that capacity in around 2013, 2014. We had about 700 million barrels at 2017 when we started the congressionally mandated sales. A number of laws have mandated us to sell over since 2017.
The sales, your evaluation of the sales that were mandated by Congress, was it to stabilize pricing or fill a void?
No, sir. It was for deficit reduction, providing funding for those bills. For
Pay fors.
Absolutely.
We
yes,
understand that.
Yes, sir. And right there was
we have a voice. We have a verbal over here. Awful.
Yes. So
on top of that.
So since we were at 700 million barrels, we sold a number of congressional mandated sales. We had 180 million barrels of emergency sales this year as a result of Putin's invasion of Ukraine. And so right now we are sitting at around 400 million barrels. Currently, we have a study underway. It wasn't requested by Congress. It was something that we started on our own. It's under administration review that would look at various levels of the SPR and determine what kind of disruption that would mitigate against. In other words, if you consider the SPR as an insurance, what are you getting with the different levels?
Do we have legislative mandatory sales coming up?
Yes, sir.
Starting when?
So we've been doing it from 2017, and we've got them through 2031. We've got the key.
Does that fulfill the pay-fors
that would fulfill the pay-fors, yes, sir. And
so we have to have that. So give me your plan. I think you have a little bit of an idea here.
Yes, sir. So as you said, we can't fill and release from the same site at the same time.
Gotcha.
It doesn't make sense for us to be releasing oil while we're trying to refill the SPR from the emergency sales. So we're trying to create an opportunity in FY24 through FY27 to stop those sales, either delay them to further out or cancel them and then do a rescission on our account to make
How much
sure
money do
those
you have?
pay-fors are accounted.
Selling the 180 million barrels, how much money do we have to spend to take off the?
So fortunately, yes, sir. Fortunately, we sold high. And so the average sales price for these emergency sales is about $96 a barrel. And the plan would be to purchase at roughly $70 a barrel or somewhere around that. So we would have enough money to refill the 100.
And how much, what is our sales, 35 billion a year, starting to, as of 2025,
So starting in 2024, we're doing 35 million barrels a year.
In order to meet-
24, 25, 26, and 27. So that 140 million barrels, plus the 60 million barrels that we're planning to purchase physically, would more than cover the 180 million barrels that we sold this year.
I hope that helps the committee a little bit get an idea of where we are right now, because it is alarming. And Dr. Huff, I'm out of time in consideration of my committee, but I really want to talk to you concerning our disposal of nuclear waste. And they had a blue ribbon committee, and we want to hear about that. So if I get a second round, if one of my colleagues here does not ask that question, I'd like to get into that with you. And with that, I'll turn to Senator Barrasso.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Huff, before getting into some of these specific meaty issues of nuclear issues, I want to talk about security clearances. You know, on July 20th of this year, I sent the department a letter specifically to the Secretary requesting a review of the security clearance procedures. Not yet gotten an answer from the department. This week, and in the national press reported today, we discover that one of the top deputies in your office who has a security clearance has been charged with felony theft. Can you assure the committee that the department will now undertake a comprehensive review of its security clearance procedures as I've requested?
Thank you, Senator. It is certainly correct that when a DOE clearance holder is charged with a crime, the case is considered by DOE personnel security officers, and the matter would be handled pursuant to DOE Order 4722A. This addresses personnel security matters. And depending on the circumstances, that could result in immediate suspension or revocation of the clearance. I assure you that the integrity of our nation's classified information protections, particularly classified nuclear information, is pivotal to our nation's security. I, along with the rest of the Department of Energy, take this security very seriously.
So is that a yes, that you will now undertake a comprehensive review, that the department will take a comprehensive review of its clearance procedures as I've requested?
Senator, we will take this back to the DOE, and I will discuss it.
Well, it's pretty disturbing when you see what the allegations are and the fact that this person has a security clearance. Move on to the next. Last month, the Department of Energy awarded Centrus a $150 million contract to produce the fuel that advanced nuclear reactors use. Glad the department is taking steps to encourage the production of this fuel right here in the United States. Centrus continues to buy and sell Russian uranium. The department shouldn't use American tax dollars to prop up a company that finances Russia's war in Ukraine. So what steps are you taking to ensure Centrus doesn't use Russian material to produce this high-assay, low-enriched uranium that is needed for this project and additional projects in the future for our nuclear future in America?
Thank you, Senator. I really value your leadership in the concern about the provision of HALEU. At this time, none of our demonstration projects plan on importing high-assay, low-enriched uranium from Russia for their first cores. However, there's very little highly enriched uranium available here in the U.S. that we can use to make the needed quantity. So this demonstration award to Centrus will allow us to make material very soon in the 2023 time frame. And that is an important first step, but we need your support in incentivizing a sustainable market-based HALEU production capability in the United States capable of providing those two first cores. Thank you.
Mr. McIntyre, no, I'm sorry, let's go to Ms. Clover first. Conserving water has been a priority for Wyoming and other upper basin states for years. This isn't something new. In fact, over the past 2 decades, municipal water use across the 4 upper basin states has declined per capita despite population growth. To help address the declining water levels of the Colorado River Basin, the upper basin states have come together to prioritize this reauthorization of the System Conservation Pilot Program. Senator Hickenlooper and I, in a bipartisan way, have introduced legislation to do just that. This program is a key tool to conserve more water in the upper basin to help the Colorado River system. States have successfully worked together to find conservation solutions. In light of this, will the Department of Interior prioritize working through the states and their delegations to address the declining water levels in the Colorado River Basin?
Thank you for the question, Senator. As you know, the Bureau of Reclamation and the department have submitted a statement for the record in support of the act, and I'm happy to get more information directly from the Bureau of Reclamation, but I can certainly say the department is committed to working with states and to using all available tools to address this problem.
Thanks, Ms. Mr. McIntyre, now to you. Earlier this year, the department sold a portion of our emergency oil reserves to the subsidiary of China's state-owned oil company, Sinopec. Does the department currently have discretion to decline to sell our emergency oil reserves to entities owned by the Chinese government?
Thank you, Senator, for that question. Currently, we are obligated by law to sell for the highest value to the taxpayer, to whatever companies provide that. The exceptions are any countries that currently have sanctions against them placed on by the U.S. government or Congress.
So if you don't have the discretion to decline, do you agree that the two bills before us today would empower the department to decline bids from China's state-owned oil companies?
Thank you, Senator. The two bills related to the SBR that I spoke to in my oral testimony do prohibit sales to China. It would include the U.S. subsidiary Unipec. As with everything, we follow the law, so if Congress changes that law, we will follow suit.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Heinrich.
Thank you, Chairman. Dr. Huff, the Russian invasion of Ukraine demonstrates the need for the U.S. to continue ensuring domestic energy security. And I support the development of a domestic strategic uranium reserve as part of a broader plan to decouple ourselves from Russia's supply of uranium. The U.S. market for uranium enrichment could potentially supply our nuclear fuel needs as long as there is a very clear, stable, and long-term U.S. market signal. So can you describe for us how DOE is playing a role in that market and discuss what additional authorizations DOE might need to ensure that we fully decouple from Russian uranium?
Thank you, Senator. Right now, we are working on a draft request for proposals that should acquire the needed high-assay, low-enriched uranium from new capacity built here in the United States to support our two demonstration projects. That comes from the $700 million allocated in the Inflation Reduction Act. So we're grateful for Congress's leadership in this. In addition to this, as this is part of a much broader cross-DOE uranium strategy, which seeks to identify ways to support the market through targeted long-term offtake agreements and needs to be coupled with appropriate import restrictions. And this uranium strategy identifies ways in which we can create a signal for the market that's long enough term that investments from the private industry will be confident enough to stand up that new capacity. And while not all of it is yet funded, we certainly are already working on the part that is. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. As you mentioned in your opening testimony, nuclear energy has an opportunity to play a key role in decarbonizing non-electricity markets, things like industrial heating processes, heavy-duty transportation. In addition to the nuclear fuel supply chain risks that you mentioned, what do you see as the key challenges in making nuclear energy more flexible? Things like adding thermal storage or combining hydrogen production with nuclear energy to increase its marketability in other sectors, things like high-temperature industrial heating, clean fuels for transportation, and how can we in Congress help?
Thank you for that. I think, the United States nuclear industry has some exciting near-term wins coming up with the Vogtle Unit 3 and Unit 4 soon to come online. And these gigawatts of clean electricity were hard to come by and suffered, some delays. And that, I think, can be helped by a future of smaller, more modular nuclear reactors that are built, as they say, more like airplanes than airports. We're really excited about this modularity in construction, which we expect will lower the cost of these units. Additionally, you mentioned high-temperature applications, thermal and combined heat and power applications are a critical part of our decarbonization that will lead to net zero. And that decarbonization can happen really well with a nuclear reactor, particularly high-temperature nuclear reactors like the ones that are being demonstrated through the Office of Clean Energy demonstrations in our Advanced Reactor Demonstration Program. Those include, for example, Natrium reactor from TerraPower, which is a sodium-cooled fast reactor. It includes one of these molten salt storage systems that you described that helps with flexibility. Additionally, the X-Energy XE100 reactor, which is a high-temperature gas reactor, it gets up to temperatures, in the many hundreds of Celsius, well beyond what our current reactor types can get to, and can be really helpful in that process heat where extremely high-quality process heat is needed.
Ms. Culver, in the remainder of my time, as I mentioned in my statement, over 160 miles of the current Continental Divide Trail route currently require diversions onto roads and highways for hikers. How would closing those gaps better achieve the purpose of the trail?
Thank you for the question, Senator Heinrich. The Continental Divide Trail, that is a scenic trail, and the purpose of the trail was to ensure scenic beauty, cultural significance, and experiences for visitors, as well as conservation for generations. So diversions to roads and highways don't serve that purpose. They also, especially in New Mexico, include a lot of risks to safety of visitors and hikers. So we feel that working on those gaps would better serve the overall purpose of this trail, and are working currently with other agencies and partners, including volunteers, on both closing the gaps and rerouting the trail.
Great. Thank you.
Before turning to Senator Daines, I have a number of letters in support of the record of a bill I introduced on my mining schools legislation without objection. I'll submit those for the record to the chairman, and for that, Senator Daines.
Ranking Member Barrasso, thank you. So I'm here to share some comments about Senate Bill 4995, the Continental Divide Trail Completion Act. I want to thank Senator Heinrich for his leadership there. I'm the lead Republican co-sponsor. It's bicameral, bipartisan, that will spur recreation, economic development, and grow jobs in Montana and local gateway communities. The history of the Continental Divide is fascinating, and the early surveyors, they looked at it. But if you start from north to south, we begin in Montana, and then we end up in New Mexico.
I think you have that backwards.
You could, depending on the season, you could start in New Mexico and end in Montana. So it depends on if you're a snowbird or not.
It's all a matter of perspective.
That is very true. But of course, it goes right through Wyoming, north to south, Colorado, and New Mexico. What a great, great part of our country that we have. It literally spans over 2,100 miles. And in Montana, that trail starts or finishes, depending on Senator Heinrich's perspective, in Glacier National Park, and runs 1,020 miles south along the Montana-Idaho border through much of it to end in Yellowstone National Park. The tourism and recreation economy is generated from this trail as a boon to many small towns in Montana. Shuttle services, hotels, restaurants, sporting goods stores, more all benefit from this Continental Divide Trail. In fact, as we look at the state of Montana, outdoor rec represents one of the state's largest economic sectors, contributing nearly $3 billion to the economy, 27,000 jobs, and accounts for 4.4% of our state's GDP. Our national parks, our forests, our trails all help contribute to Montana's economy. And that's why I believe it's so important we pass this bipartisan bill to help complete the Continental Divide Trail. There are a number of gaps in Montana that require hikers to travel long distances on highways or other unsafe locations. Specifically, there's a major gap near Butte that the community has long worked to connect. This bipartisan bill will bridge these gaps by working with our local communities, expanding resources, partnerships. It will also strictly prohibit the use of eminent domain for acquisitions, ensuring that private property rights are protected as we expand public access. Before I get to questions, I'd like to ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a long list of supporters and letters of support. And let me just quickly rattle off a few of them. Helena Chamber of Commerce, City and County of Butte-Silverbow, Beaverhead County Commissioners, Lincoln Valley Chamber of Commerce, the Glacier County Tourism Commission, the Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership, the Montana Conservation Corps, Wild Montana, and a lot more Montana national groups.
Without objection.
Now, turning to my questions. Ms. Culver, maintenance, operation, and planning for the trail is a community effort. The Forest Service and the Department of the Interior must rely on partners such as county commissions, gateway communities, as well as recreation and conservation groups such as the Montana Conservation Corps to maintain and manage the trail. The question for you is, how does the Continental Divide Trail Completion Act help promote community engagement to complete the trail?
Thank you for the question, Senator Daines. The bill creates a trail completion team and directs that team to work with other federal agencies, but also states, tribes, local governments, acequias, communities, land grant, Mercedes, as I mentioned, and the coalition that currently works on the Continental Divide Trail, other groups, as you mentioned, and volunteers. So, it really continues this spirit and commitment to collaboration and community engagement to complete the trail.
Ms. Culver, the bill allows for multiple methods to complete the trail: donations, exchanges, easements, cooperative agreements. It also strictly prohibits the use of eminent domain. I will tell you, Montanans always have a little bit of fear when somebody says, we're from D.C., we're coming out here to help you. Can you verify that if passed, this legislation would prohibit the use of eminent domain and require the Forest Service and the Bureau of Land Management to seek community-supported solutions and willing agreements to complete the trail?
Senator Daines, the bill does prohibit the use of eminent domain to complete the trail, and we support the bill as it's written in that way and believe it's consistent with the administration's support of locally driven and voluntary conservation efforts.
Thanks for that very clear answer. It's appreciated. Lastly, the Mining Schools Act. Mr. McIntyre, it's my understanding that S. 3915, the Mining Schools Act of 2022, defines an eligible mining school as an accredited mining school in a state with a mining GDP of $2 billion or more. Would Montana Tech, there in Butte, Montana, qualify under the definition as currently written in the bill, and what other mining schools would be ineligible?
Thank you, Senator, for that question. While this program would fall under DOE's Office of Fossil Energy and Carbon Management, the department has not yet developed a full list of eligible entities based on the draft legislation, and once that is completed, we will be happy to get back to you.
Okay, and I'd appreciate once you understand that the status of Montana Tech, if you would there, Butte. Appreciate it. Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Thank you. Senator King.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Huff, you uttered, I think, a very important phrase at the beginning of your testimony. You said energy security is national security. And I think that's very important to illustrate that point. Just this week in the Intelligence Committee, we had a hearing on energy options for this country because of its relationship to national security. The development of safe and cost-effective nuclear power could be one of the key drivers of the future economy. The problem is both technology, as you know, and also cost. I love the analogy of the airplane and the airport. Guess how many 737s Boeing builds in a month in Rendon, Washington?
I don't know, sir. Thousands.
The answer is 31.
Whoa.
One a day. One a day to that immensely complex piece of machinery. I'm not suggesting we can build one nuclear reactor a day, but I am suggesting that we have a long way to go. My concern is that the effort toward the development of this technology is somewhat diverse, and I want to know if we have the resources and the coordination to do something which really should be one of the federal government's highest priorities, working with the private sector. Do we have the resources? Are they being allocated coherently? And do we have coordination? It concerns me that maybe we've got Department of Energy, we've got the Defense Department, we've got other people working on this project, and frankly, it just keeps getting further and further away. I've been in these hearings for 10 years now, and it was always 10 years away. Well, here we are, and it's now 5 to 10 years away. Please reassure me that this is getting the priority it deserves.
Thank you, sir. It is an all-of-government priority from my experience. You know, you listed a number of agencies that have equities in this endeavor, and I think they're all very interested in seeing this achieve its promise. In the Department of Energy, one of the tactics that has worked really well is from Congress, we have been very lucky to receive the appropriation certainty from the bipartisan infrastructure law that fully allocated the $2.5 billion for the completion of the 2 advanced reactor demonstration program demo reactors. And this really reduces the uncertainty that those 2 demos will be completed on time this decade. There's a number of different sources of uncertainty in the on-time, on-budget completion of a nuclear reactor plant, everything from project management by the company building it, financing certainty, and regulatory certainty, fuel supply, supply chain issues. And I think the government across these all-of-government agencies is working in a way that we hope will reach that. But I think that model around the Advanced Reactor Demonstration Program with public-private partnerships that support those demonstrations is a really critical one.
I hope you're right, and I want to just suggest a sense of urgency. My concern, whenever I hear the phrase around here, all of government, to me that means nobody's in charge. I want one throat to choke on this. I want to know who's responsible for producing a cost-effective, safe, reliable, modular reactor. I think that should be one of our highest priorities, and I hope you'll take that sense of urgency back. Ms. Culver, just to emphasize, the CREST Act, we're not going to be able to deal effectively with climate change simply with carbon capture. We're going to have to pull carbon out of the atmosphere, and that's the biggest challenge that we have. And I hope you will work with us and the Energy Department, all the departments on this issue of natural carbon capture and retention. So I just want to emphasize that the importance of that bill. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Murkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to those who are here to testify today. Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Barrasso, I also want to acknowledge that not a member of this committee, but we may as well call her a member. Darla has been here for I don't know how many years on the committee, and I understand that this may be 21 years on the committee. All right, that on this committee.
10 on this
10
committee.
on this committee. Oh, only 10 on this committee. Well, Darla, as one who has appreciated your guidance throughout all of these committee hearings that happen here in the Energy Committee, know that we wish you well in your retirement. But thank you for all that you have done. Nice to have your services. But now I expect you to give me my full 5 minutes here on the clock.
It doesn't matter, because I knew it would always be reserved for you.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I want to follow up with your questions regarding the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, because I think it is important that as a committee here, we understand the status of this insurance policy. And I've always viewed it as an insurance policy, and one that we shouldn't draw down just when we're attempting to ameliorate prices or the politics that may come with it. And I think we saw when President Biden took the steps to withdraw significant volumes from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, 180 million barrels of oil over the course of 180 days. There's consequence to that. It's not just drawing it down. It's my understanding that the salt caverns actually degrade with each and every drawdown. Now, some years ago, we directed significant resources to the Department of Energy for the life extension of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. We talked about the imperative to modernize and to effectively be able to move forward with strategic petroleum reserve that worked when we needed it to work. And so the Life Extension 2 project is underway. I'm wondering if you can give the committee a little bit of a status update on that, when it's scheduled to be completed. And then if you can speak to whether or not these, this really unprecedented drawdown, is that contributing to the need for this emergency supplemental funding that has been requested for maintenance of the SPR?
Thank you, Senator. I just want to personally say it's an honor to be here today because I was in one of those back benches back when another Senator Murkowski was chair of this committee, and there's
You
a
go
long
back a
history
ways.
there.
Yeah.
With regard to the SPR modernization, so Congress authorized us to raise funds from sales over 4 years, up to $2 billion. We ended up raising $1.4 billion, as we thought that was what would be sufficient to accomplish everything that we intended. Unfortunately, a number of factors, including supply chain problems and labor shortages and everything, we've seen rising costs associated with the project, just like everyone else has. So this $500 million that the administration has asked to be provided would allow us to complete all activities as part of the life extension.
And what's the timeline on that then?
So the timeline right now is to complete all activities by FY27, although a lot of them will be completed by a lot sooner than that, FY25 and FY26.
So can you speak to the degradation of the salt caverns then with these withdrawals?
Yes. So we use Sandia National Labs to help us monitor our caverns. Without our caverns, we don't have an SPR. And so we take the condition of them very seriously. We, as you said, every time we pump water in to push oil out, I wouldn't call it degrades, but there's a limited amount of times that we can do that. So we work closely with Sandia to make sure that we still have plenty of opportunity to remove oil from the caverns. I'll just stop there.
Okay. I want to.
I lost my train of thought.
Well,
that's what happens when you're around this long.
But there is impact. There clearly is impact. I think we get that. I have just a few, just 1 minute remaining here, and I want to direct it to you, Ms. Culver, and it relates to the Ambler Access Project. As you know, less than 50 miles of this proposed road is across federal land. The remaining is across state land and ANC-owned land. Can you share with me or explain why the BLM has exerted authority across the entirety of the project area, and really what gives the agency the authority to deny the ANCs the ability to conduct this non-groundbreaking pre-construction activities, the baseline data gathering activities, whether it's cultural assessments and inventories? I know the state of Alaska has directed some correspondence to the district manager there in Alaska. This was mid-November, asking for an answer to the state's request, asking for an answer by today. I don't know whether a response has been sent to that, but can you speak to how you believe that the BLM has the authority here when, again, so much is not part of the federal domain?
Thanks for the question, Senator. I do know that our Alaska State BLM Director is in contact with the state of Alaska, so I expect they are communicating about that request. You know, the process around the Ambler Road is ongoing. We have taken that back from the court, and we have committed to not engaging in or permitting surface disturbing activities while ongoing supplemental environmental analysis in consultation is underway.
I do understand that as it relates to federal land, but again, when the vast majority is on state-owned land and an ANC, Alaska Native Corporation-owned land, I don't understand how the agency feels that they have that authority to disallow any non-groundbreaking activities, whether it's cultural assessment, which you would hope would be delegated to the ANCs in the first place.
And our authority that we are looking at is currently, I think what you're referring to, relates to our agreement under the National Historic Preservation Act and the programmatic agreement that's in place that applies to all aspects of these projects. And we are, again, committed to the court to avoid disturbing activities.
And if you will go back to this letter dated November 18th, you'll see that these pre-construction activities have been approved by the state and they've been determined by the SHPO that these activities will have no adverse effect to historic and cultural resources. So again, we're going to have additional conversation about this, but I think it's very clear from the state's perspective, and I think it's very clear from our perspective back here, that the decisions coming out of the agency right now are in direct contrast to what we believe the authorities are.
I appreciate that and look forward to ongoing discussion.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Cortez Masto, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And also, I want to thank you for your commitment to work with me in my home state on the consent-based siting process in order to find a suitable repository for our nation's nuclear waste. And I greatly appreciate the discussion draft that you put forward, which includes text from my bill S541, Nuclear Waste Informed Consent Act. I look forward to continuing that work to amplify the Blue Ribbon Panel Commission's report that came out. Dr. Huff, let me start with you. Since the mid-1970s, it's been suggested that the nuclear waste disposal program should be managed by a standalone single-purpose agency, and that an agency separate from the Department of Energy would better manage long-term waste repository. Does the department support the establishment of a nuclear waste administration or similar new independent executive agency to take on the responsibilities of the nuclear waste program? And what would be the benefit of separating these responsibilities beyond DOE's administration?
The administration hasn't taken a particular position on that, but I will say the effect would certainly be to reduce the year-on-year uncertainty of appropriating the nuclear waste fund and would enable that administration to separately and independently move forward without sort of annual uncertainty if they were to be given access to the nuclear waste fund. And I think, there is a potential, lot of benefit to that.
But the department hasn't taken a position on its support of an independent agency or not?
No, the administration has not.
Or, excuse me, the administration. Okay, thank you. When it comes to all aspects of the nuclear fuel cycle, can you expand on the importance for engagement and consent from all stakeholders, including state, local, tribal, and private input?
Yeah, state, local, tribal, and private interests around consent are critical. We need consent that is broad and deep, passing through the hierarchy from federal, state, to local, to individuals in communities. And I think what we're seeking in our consent-based siting process is more capacity building around the information part of that informed consent. And I really appreciate your leadership on this issue.
Thank you. And with more countries tackling site characterization, designs, and safety assessments for nuclear waste geologic repositories, I'm curious, are there any new significant concepts and lessons learned that could help inform the U.S. nuclear waste repository program?
Thank you so much for this question, Senator, because there is a lot we are learning from other countries. That includes Finland, Sweden, and Canada. I think when we look out at the broad set of countries enabling this kind of progress through consent-based siting approaches, Canada is really similar to us. In particular, their nuclear waste management organization, NWMO, has had some very impressive progress with regard to citing their repository, which again should be much harder than citing interim storage, which is our current goal, right? And they have, a more similar structure to our government, having provinces like we have states, and that really plays a role in our ability to understand the role of both local and state and federal engagements, and we think NWMO is making really good progress on that.
Good. That's good to know and something for us all to watch. You talked a little bit about this earlier. There's growing support for the advanced reactor technology. But there's still much to consider as it relates to the accommodation of the back end of the fuel cycle. What are some of the waste implications of new advanced reactors, and how the implications could they affect the search for workable waste disposal solutions?
Thank you for that. Some advanced reactor types reduce the volume and lifetimes of spent nuclear fuel. Some reduce the radiotoxicity in the near term, but largely we look at this in the context of making sure that we, the federal government, when we plan to store and dispose of that waste, we have the scientific backing to know what to do with all kinds of waste. And we've had a number of decades to prepare for the kinds of fuels and fuel cycles that are coming down the pike here. And so we're reliant on our national laboratory research, as well as reports recently, like by the National Academies Committee on this topic, to help inform what remains and what's needed. But I think we're in a really good forward-leaning posture around identifying the gaps around how to handle advanced nuclear spent fuel.
And you believe that at this juncture, we are more prepared now to accommodate that waste than we had been in the past?
Absolutely. Every day, new science is made, new data is created at our national labs to support that. And our integrated waste management portfolio in the United States, in my office, also helps to support the storage and transportation components of this, not just the final disposal.
Thank you. With
that, we'll start our second round. If I have just a few questions very quickly. Mr. McIntyre, very quickly. I know you have about $2 billion in identified damages to the salt caverns. You've been allowed $1.4 billion of that. You're about 500 plus short. Do you need appropriations for us to basically transfer the money and the profits you've made from what we've been able to sell, the $180 billion? To allow you to complete your restoration, I believe. Has the 1.4 has it been expended already?
Yeah, thank you, Senator, for that question.
You want to turn your mic on?
Oh, I thought it was.
Okay.
So I'll sit closer.
Just put your mic up a little bit higher. Probably work better.
Thank you for that question, Senator. We do need legislation to be able to move any funding out of our one account that funds that we have revenues from the emergency sales into our Life Extension 2 account. We've spent about 1.1 billion of the 1.4. I mean, we haven't spent that, but it's been committed to. So most of it's already been committed to. So that additional 500 million could come from the sales.
But you still, I mean, your cost of repairs are still in the $2 billion range.
Yes, to complete the whole project, it would be the 1.92 billion.
We'd have to give you appropriated authority to use money that you already have.
Yes, sir.
I got you. Okay. With that, Dr. Huff, we talked briefly, and I know that Senator Cortez Masto is extremely concerned, and but we think all 50, we're responsible. All 50 states benefit from our nuclear program, and we all have a responsibility, and with that should be a fair process. I've talked to some of our friends in Australia, and they seem to be very aggressive on looking at some of their opportunities of taking this waste, because basically they're a big supplier of uranium also. They have supplies, which we're going to be needing. And what's your concerns about Russia right now being able to put an awful lot of harm to our nuclear commercialization that we use if they would cut off their uranium supply?
Thank you, Senator. Continued reliance on fuel, particularly conversion and enrichment from the Russian Federation, puts our energy supply chain at risk for the 20% of the electricity in this country that is provided by clean nuclear power. And we're very concerned about making sure that we can support in strategic investments that'll expand that domestic fuel cycle. We're talking to our partners and allies that are capable of helping us with that supply chain and engaging with them on a forward-moving plan over the course of the coming years that should expand it, but it will require investment, and we're really...
Also, they have a big problem permitting, also getting it done in a timely fashion.
That's right. So it does certainly require, if you're going to stand up, for example, a new enrichment facility, that you engage with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission for a license to create that facility here in the United States. While some facilities may already have standing licenses that enable new capacity to be stood up quickly, we do expect that for a diversity of suppliers, some new licenses will have to
As you
be.
mentioned, the 20% of our energy comes from nuclear. If that supply of uranium stops, and it could stop immediately, what damage and how quick will we realize this damage to our energy supply?
Thank you, Senator. We're taking this very seriously in DOE and have conducted a number of analyses. We believe that there is time. So nuclear reactors only refuel every year and a half or so.
If they shut down next month, we say that Russia's put a blockade on that and not sending any more in retaliation to our support of Ukraine for the war.
Right. We would have a little time to continue operating our plants and refueling them, but yeah, an immediate blockade of Russian Federation fuel would require that we draw down some of the inventory in our borders. We expect that there's a few years of that inventory available that could be shared among our
We have some of our free trade countries, free trade agreement countries that we're able to rely on, and can they quickly ramp up to supply the loss that we have?
We're engaging actively with our, allies and partners across the world, but there is a broad deficit in supply were Russia to stop supplying to all of the peaceful democratic world. So everyone would have to work together to expand that.
It could be of critical, concern to national defense.
Correct.
And you're willing to pull the trigger if you have to.
Yes, sir. I think we need to be prepared for a disruption in supply.
Well, I'm just saying, to be able to process, getting the stock feed is one thing.
Oh, yeah.
Processing it.
That's right.
And how many opportunities are there around the world for us to process with countries that we have a free trade agreement with or our allies?
Yes, and enriching nations are very limited among the nations of the world. It's very specialized technology, converting and enriching uranium.
Well, I know we keep talking about disposal of waste. We're not talking about basically producing the energy that we need. That's the problem. And that's what I'm concerned about, and I've been concerned. So we're talking, whether it be our friends in Canada, whether our friends in Australia, whether it's basically relying on ourselves a little bit better than what we do. But we need your direction and guidance on that, and we appreciate it. Any other further questions at all? Let me thank all of you for a great, I think, hearing today, and the expertise that you all have and bring to it is helping us immensely. All three categories, everything we talked about today. We're very much concerned about SPUR, as you know, Mr. McIntyre, and your expertise and your longevity and your expertise has all played to our comfort zone, if you will. But we're concerned about 400 million barrels. We're concerned, are we going to get back to 700? We're concerned, basically, do we have the spare production to do that or spare capacity? Because the world's demanding more and more. And we're not energy independent as we are now. And with supply chains, I don't know if you're able to get back there. If you don't, do you have the salt caverns that are going to be basically deteriorating because there is no the great amounts of oil that we should have in there. And you can't be taking out and putting out. So we got to make some decisions here. Are we going to allow them basically to stop the mandatory sales and use the resources from the sales we just had in order to replace that, to meet our pay-fors that we've already obligated ourselves to? It's a mess. It's really a mess, but we're in it, and we got to get out of it, and we can.
It's nice that they bought low and sold high.
Yeah, but I think we're about ready to buy a little bit higher than we bought before. But still yet, I think we're watching it very carefully there. Nuclear, Dr. Huff, we feel we're comfortable that you're there in that position, but with that, we're really very much concerned about the ability for us to maintain the energy that we need for our country, and we're going to be expanding more nuclear. I've been very much hawkish on this. If we're going to meet any type of our goals and targets that we're setting for emissions, nuclear plays a big part. And the SMRs are going to come on strong, I believe. We're seeing an awful lot of activity all over. So we're very active in that. And also a proper way to dispose of our waste. We have to come to grips with this. And I'm very respectful of Senator Cortez Masto. If I was in Nevada, I'd want to be heard. I want the government to make a decision without my input, and I think that's all you asked for. So we're very much involved in this and very much concerned. And what can I say about Interior and BLM? Most, 25, 35% of our energy comes off BLM lands, and the responsibilities to do it. And the Investment Reduction Act is a balanced approach to saying we're going to extract the minerals that the people of the United States need and use and should be rewarded for, but also we're going to be using that land for a lot of the new technology, whether it's going to be major wind farms, major solar farms with new transmissions and things that's going to be needed, but also be able to continue to have the horsepower we need to run our country. So, and I think my dear friend, the Senator from Alaska, Senator Murkowski, has some unusual challenges, and I have been there and seen them firsthand. And all she's asking for is the help that those people need and they deserve. So with that, members will have until close of business tomorrow to submit additional questions for the record. And with that, committee is adjourned.